So welcome to tonight's presentation on why membranes fail. As you can see on the leading slide, we have a leaking Australia. We have a leaking problem, and we are in a leaky building syndrome in Australia. And if you think that we're not, then you need to have a look at the data, because we definitely are. So I want to welcome a big welcome to all the attendees and to David Previte from Waterproofing Integrity. It really does prove that you're delivering the best service to your clients by staying ahead of the tsunami that is approaching. And for many, it's a little bit of a hidden game, but when you do study the data and the research that we have been doing over the last few years, you will find out that it's going to cost us tens of billions of dollars over the coming decades. So as this slide states on here, I think you've got a crisis in your country. Dr. Nicole Johnson from Deakin University, he's a property professor, did a building audit on 212 buildings across the Eastern Seaboard back in 2019. I personally sat down with her. I've actually delivered a webinar with her since then on the leaky building syndrome. Don't want to downplay the issues in relation to combustible cladding, but I think water penetration issues in buildings are much, much bigger, and they are. The leaky building syndrome in New Zealand cost their economy over $23 billion. They're still fixing it. Canada, over 30 years ago, are still repairing buildings from their leaky building syndrome. Waterproofing defects are long-term. They generally lead to structural issues. It costs 30% more than any other defect to repair. I'm not going to read everything out off this slide, but it's pretty common knowledge that waterproofing related issues lead the building and construction industry as the #1 fault, with over 70% of insurance claims coming from defective waterproofing. And many are aware that internal and external wet area designs are actually maybe non-compliant to the building code or non-functional for waterproofing. So waterproofing, when I was taught by another tradie out on site, product reps, and I inherited a lot of poor techniques or misguided information that has contributed to long-term failure. So I'll put my hand up like everyone else and say that I've inherited the same mistakes. It wasn't until I got into teaching that I realized that how many mistakes I was making. So I personally started to develop courses like this from the mistakes that I made out on site, and I didn't realize I was making. So I've got a very compassionate outlook on why we have the failures that we have. I'm not here to point the finger. I'm here to try and help people understand where they're going wrong and how they can improve. I was actually teaching in Geelong for Master Builders of Victoria, an internal waterproofing course, and one of my former builders, who I did waterproofing for around 7 to 10 years before, hung me out in front of the class and said, "Mate, what are you doing teaching waterproofing? I had several of your bathrooms fail." So that was a bit of a compromised position to be put in that situation in front of a class that I was about to teach. We went through the presentation, and then we were able to identify why the bathrooms that we were tiling / waterproofing back in those days failed. And they're all from water stop installation failures or lack of water stop installation failures. So first and foremost, I want to say with this presentation, we encourage as much chat as you can. So type your questions into the chat feature. And then what we'll do is we'll address all the questions at the end of the presentation. We'll share the screen. Nat, who's online, one of the waterproof awareness staff, she'll read out the questions, and David and myself will address as many questions as we can with the time that we've got left. There's no ego. We're all here to learn. We learn every time we teach one of these sessions, even from the questions that are asked. So please type them into the chat feature so that we can read the questions out at the end of the presentation, and we'll get a lot of value out of the presentation, I'm sure. So I want to say a big welcome to David Previte. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Byron. Thanks for having me on again. Looking forward to it.
No, same here, mate. So, yeah, David and I attended a few seminars pre-COVID, and we sort of crossed paths and probably had the same vibe running about what we're trying to do with the industry. And now we create a lot of courses and content and probably past clients from state to state as well, David being in New South Wales and myself in Sydney. So David, perhaps you can let everyone know what you do and who you are.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't already know me, my name's David, as Byron said, and I currently run a company called Waterproofing Integrity. I founded it about 2 years ago, and our purpose is to provide quality and compliance consulting services, mainly because at the time there was more or less no one offering that service, at least not in the scale that we intend to provide to the industry. So prior to that, I was working in construction waterproofing for about 10 years or so, went all the way from the apprentice on site learning the trade all the way up into project management. And
sure that we're all muted, please. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I also currently sit on a couple of committees for Standards Australia and also the AIW committee. But yeah, day-to-day waterproofing consulting. So looking forward to sharing all of that with you.
Tony, I think it is. If you could mute yourself, please, mate. Tony Bombardi. There we go. Sorry, Dave, continue on, mate.
That's all right. That's all right. I think I covered it all. So yeah, that's my background. It's written up there anyway. And looking forward to talking through this webinar, but most importantly, interested to see what sort of questions arise at the end.
Definitely. So please type them in because we will answer as many questions as possible. So through your time on the tools, you worked on the tools in the industry, you got taught out on the job site, and now you've got into, waterproofing integrity and doing testing and monitoring of the waterproofing process, quality control. How much did you find out that you didn't know once you started studying the codes and the standards?
There was a lot, and I think all the steps that I've taken up to the point that where I've arrived at now, I guess you not only learn something technically more, but you're also exposed to, I guess, a little bit of the politics and the nuance of the industry, because that's a big part of it as well. And it's not only a lack of technical knowledge where we've arrived where we're at, but it's also an understanding of how the industry works and how waterproofing packages are procured and the different motives and what everyone needs to arrive at the right point at the end of the day.
Yeah, so very easy to get it wrong, and hopefully we'll show you some of that through this lead-in free webinar. So we'll just continue on. So David, let's talk about point one. So correct selection and compliance testing is paramount. Selected materials must pass relevant standard performance criteria. Exposed membrane for UV. So in your experience, how do people go about selecting a product, and what are the issues you see with that?
Yeah, okay, no problem. So I think one of the biggest problems has always been, and this could be applied to all of these three criteria we're about to talk about, is going for the cheapest product, or probably more to the point, misguided attempts at trying to pick the best product. People will go for something that's fair and they think is value for money, but they're not necessarily assessing that on the things that they should be. And probably the best assessment criteria we can apply is testing to the standards. And this is third-party testing. Big believer in, the independent, unbiased third-party testing. So in my mind, any waterproofing product that you're selecting or anyone's selecting, the first port of call is, do these have test data that confirms that they comply with the requirements of 4858 and 4654.1?
And so let's talk about, couldn't agree more. Also, we have code mark of conformity, which we're starting to see a lot of prominence now. Is probably a little bit more robust. We won't break that down in depth too much tonight. But so compatibility chains, what is a compatibility chain and why is it important?
So your compatibility chain, as with links in a chain, is talking about all the different layers or interfaces between a product. So a simple one is your substrate that you're going to apply your membrane to. You're going to put down a primer, you're going to use sealants, you're going to use membranes, and there's a lot of different products out there. You need to ensure that all of those are intercompatible between each other. And these also take into consideration sometimes having a damp substrate is unavoidable. So it's not just a case of saying, well, okay, all of these products are made by the same manufacturer. There are other considerations about usability and how they're going to interface with different building elements as well. But let's just keep it simple for now and say that keeping your products with one manufacturer is a great piece of advice to start with to ensure your compatibility chain.
So in terms of a material failure, so we see 10%, the material's actually breaking down or failing on their own, right? Once they're tested to these standards, they're put through the rigmarole, to use that term. And so in terms of a material breakdown, it's quite rare. We probably see it more so in the below grade space. But what we do have an issue is that there's no regular periodic defined testing parameter. So there's no regular short-term period of when these products must be tested again. And the technical data sheets get changed that regularly, which would imply that the manufacturers are changing the technical components that make up the product, but then they're not tested again regularly enough. Now, this test data that we see on the right-hand side, it says in-house test method. If you ever see something like that on a technical data sheet, then you would walk away from that product straight from the start. So we want to see regular periodic testing, third-party NADA accredited lab. So we have CSIRO here in Australia. We have XTech Gen, which has started doing it in South Australia. We have brands in New Zealand. So there are a few organisations that do it. So in terms of material failure, it is low. Once you buy the product, it's basically your fault when it fails. It's very rare that the manufacturer is going to be brought into the failure with you. So you've got to be careful of that. Now, what we commonly see out on the job site, and I'm going to read what the blurb at the bottom of the slide says. This picture has not been used to discredit any of the products. They're all quite good when they're used in a compatibility chain. So we can see here in the picture, we've got Grant, Marpe, Protec, there's a Sika sealant there. And this was all purchased from one shop and was spec'd to the client by the sales rep from the store of a system that would work. Now, if this failed and these products were tested out on site to assess what was the causation of the failure, the installer would be held accountable for not forming a compatibility chain from the product. So, for example, a Marpe primer or two different primers, so a porous and non-porous primer, a Marpe sealant. We'll be very careful to ensure that we're using products that are tested to work with each other in the lab, and in saying that, the lab tested standard testing parameters is 23 degrees at 50% relative humidity. It's very rare that we see those conditions out on the job site. We may see it for 1 or 2 or 4 hours a year. So we must keep that in mind, that we need to buy systems. The products are a system and they're tested with their own primers, their own sealants. And if we're using a bathroom membrane such as this, we want to ensure that the membrane itself and then the tile adhesive that's going to go over the top of it will also form a system-to-system compatibility chain, which will also enhance our warranty from the manufacturer. So this system can work, but with how many failures we're seeing in Australia and how much it's going to cost us individually and the economy, you've got to be very careful when you're going to choose this course of action. So we'll go on to the next slide, David, and I'll hit play, and then perhaps you can tell everyone what's happened here.
This is a demonstration of the caulking applied as the corner fillet, being uncured after about 5 days. Still very soft.
Okay, so Dave.
So that may have been a bit hard to hear what was said there, but what that scenario is a corner junction, wall to floor in an internal wet area, and there was a sealant applied as the bond breaker corner fillet at that junction, and then a solvent polyurethane membrane was applied over the top of it. And my inspectors had gone out to this site maybe 5 or 6 days after that installation had been done, and they sort of reported back that it was uncured in the corner and they couldn't test it. And everyone's initial reaction was that, oh, well, you know, it's winter, we just need to let it cure a little bit longer. Now, knowing the product, that was sort of off to me, so I went out and had a look at it. And what the scenario was it wasn't the corner fillet that wasn't cured, it was actually quite cured. It was the membrane that had been applied over that corner fillet. And after a little bit of digging and getting past the stories that the contractors sort of tell on site when they want to cover up an issue, we actually found out that the sealant that they'd used in the corner there wasn't a solvent polyurethane sealant. It was MS modified silicon sealant, which causes compatibility issues. So that sealant had been applied in the corner there, and when the solvent-based polyurethane membrane was applied over the top, the chemical reaction between the two had retarded that curing process of the membrane and sort of turned it into a cheesy type compound rather than a rubbery compound in that corner junction.
So very easy to get it wrong. It's very common in the industry for installers to go and buy sealant from anywhere. Or for example, for a builder, building the house, the plumbers come in, use a NutriCure sealant in the wet area, and then we can't stick anything to it. So there's a whole heap of ways that we can have different material failure. So that's one component of why we have failures in membrane installs. So we'll keep moving. So material failure. So material design and install, they are all inherently related. So we've tried to break them down into different categories, but we must understand that they all do need to work together and form an actual waterproofing compatibility with the building itself. So one thing we commonly see here, we've got on the slide, the left-hand side, we've got a table that's extracted from AS 3740, so the domestic wet area standard. What it talks about is membrane class, so 1, 2, and 3. And what it actually also defines is the size of the cove or fillet in the corner as required by the standard that relates to that membrane class. So if we're using a class 3 membrane, which is what we typically see for a membrane in our bathrooms, we must have a 12 mil cove in the corner. And if we're using a class 2, which would typically be a cementitious membrane, we're not going to break all of this down into too much depth. It is defined as a 35 mil cove. Now, the cove itself is measured via the hypotenuse, so the long side of the triangle. It can either be in the shape of a right angle triangle or a cove. Now, the cove itself is designed to help the membrane transition from a vertical to horizontal surface. Membranes don't like sharp corners. They like to have a nice radius so that they can transition and move with the anticipated movement of the building. These tools here, you can actually purchase them now. The component at the top side will cut the sealant to the same size as what is listed as in the Australian standards. Then we have a checking element that is highlighted in the circles. And then at the bottom, we have a wet film thickness gauge, which is used to measure the wet film thickness of the membrane. And for the new upcoming standard to be released, David, is it important to measure the wet film thickness, and why?
Yeah, it actually will be a requirement in the revised version of AS 3740, which is your internal wet areas design and installation standard.
Yep.
There will now be requirements for both wet film thickness testing and dry film thickness testing.
Okay.
Obviously, you want to make sure you're doing your wet film thickness because that's during your installation process.
Yep.
If you do test that and you see that it's a little bit under, you can easily apply some more membrane at that time. Whereas if you're waiting till it's dry, you're having to go back and redo another coat, which is a little bit more difficult.
So we're using tools such as this. You're showing due diligence through your installation. So if there was a scenario where it went to court, you can say, well, hang on a sec. I access a technical data sheet from the product manufacturer. I measured the membrane. I took several readings with this tool. I worked out the average and we monitored it through the process, and you take some photo evidence as well. So we'll move into the design component. So David, let's talk about a few of these key points here. So incorrect or missing architectural drawings.
Yeah, that's a very common issue that's come about because of the rise in prevalence of design and construct building. The architect was mostly just engaged to do a bit of a skeleton and make things look nice to on paper to sell the units, and then it was handed over to the builder to do design and construct. So it was very bare bones, and that involved a lot of improvising when it came to executing the works on site.
And so both of us, we are engaged regularly to assist with the design of waterproofing systems for buildings. And it's very common to find that, you know, the way the building has been designed will actually contribute to a waterproofing failure. So very, very common. The next slide that I'm going to bring up, I'll show in depth why that's prevalent in the industry, particularly with lightweight balconies. So incorrect specification. It's common for architects or designers to spec a product that may have been used from a previous job or a detail from a previous job and just tie that one in with a new building, and it may not be suitable. And incomplete design documents result in improvised waterproofing solutions during construction. So the building getting built and then the subcontractor coming on board and inspect to try and fix up a design error with the waterproofing system, and then we have a failure. And anything else that you can come to hand straight off the bat, David? Well, let's talk about this picture here, for example.
Yeah, so what that is actually showing, I'm sure you can already see that's an underfloor heating system that's applied over a completed waterproofing system. But what you're actually seeing there is the shower water stop angle. So the waterproofing had been completed on this internal wet area. It was handed over, waterproof was off-site. Fortunately, my inspectors were coming through a couple of days later to just check the compliance, and they noticed that the floor heating contractor, who only had an inlet for his electrical conduits in the general bathroom area, also decided that he needed to have his heating run into the shower area. And the only way he could get it to go in there was to cut large chunks out of the water stop. Now, for those of you that don't know, that water stop exists for a reason between those two areas. You, of course, want to contain your water in your shower area and not have it leaking out into making your general bathroom area moist unnecessarily.
So many don't understand the purpose of the water stop angle is to provide vertical separation, and we actually need to isolate the shower from the actual bathroom floor. So the shower in a wet area is classified as a wet area within a wet area. So we break that down in great depth in our water stop compliance webinar, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So this slide here has been extracted from our balconies webinar, which is our most popular one. One common thing that we see is that we have lightweight structural sheet flooring, Skyon, for example, and where the building will be designed to have a channel drain or a central leak control flange, or a puddle flange as it's known in industry. And these manufacturers actually do not warrant their substrate if you have that design in your balcony. So instantaneously, the balcony itself will not hold any warranty for the substrate. And then the membrane manufacturer will void their warranty because the substrate has no warranty. So we can see down the bottom of the slide, in the middle of your screen, an extract from AS 4654.2, which is the external above ground standard. The only method of outfall that is warranted by these substrate manufacturers is a removable edge gutter detail. If you want to try and get a strip drain, as is mentioned here, from the structural sheet flooring supplier, you must get a site-specific specification. The drama with this specification drawing here is it will not allow subtile moisture release and will then enhance efflorescence issues on your bathroom, mold and bacterial growth. It can break down the liquid membrane if one's being used there. So we need to be very careful about the design of our areas. And if you're unsure, then you need to engage a consultant. So David and I are both committee members on the Australian Institute of Waterproofing. You can access their website as well if you didn't want to use us as consultants to help you understand how the design must be improved. Down the left-hand side of this, I'm not going to run through every point, but it has membrane installed under a slip sheet with a mortar bed and then tiled directly over the top of the mortar bed without any membrane over the mortar bed. If that method was used on a lightweight balcony, we're going to have live and dead loading issues, extensive efflorescence issues. We'll have the screed most likely start to release bacteria, which can attack the tile adhesives, and you're going to have a failed balcony, a balcony with defects within the first 1 to 2 years. So there is a multitude of issues that are coming out of the back of design. So we'll go to the next slide. David, perhaps you can chat about this one.
Okay, this is my favorite one. I'm probably going to talk about it for 20 seconds or so. And I'm sure you've all noticed the brain teaser puzzle on the left-hand side. While I am talking and explaining why that's actually relevant, feel free to type your best guess into the chat and we'll see who can come up with the right answer. So what is so important about the design process, other than what we've already discussed about compatibility, making sure all the products fit together, is water shedding principles is what we're demonstrating sort of with this. And that involves integrating everything from your rooftop, your drainage system, your facade, into your balcony and terrace waterproofing, planter boxes. When rain is applied to a building, it's going to be shed down across that building. And if water is protected in one zone, say in your facade, and it's captured water, then thought needs to be put into about how that water is going to be transferred from the facade tanking or vapor barrier into your balcony waterproofing system. And this is probably one of the most common issues that we see, is that interfacing between different elements of the building hasn't been considered properly. And so I see Joe has actually already got this one right there, number 13. That is the bucket which will fill up first. And the reason that's important is if you actually look and if you consider that those buckets are sections of the building as the building sheds water, this photo on the right-hand side, which happens to be a balcony area that doesn't have correct falls to the drainage channel being the next bucket, this is our bucket 13 in this scenario. And that's not where we want water to stop. We want it to continue going towards the drain into the stormwater system. And that's why that sort of analysis is important in making sure you have a correct design.
So well done, Joe. Grant, I don't know where you saw number 14, but anyway, good on you, mate. And for those of you, I struggled to get number 13 anyway, but what I'm going to talk about is this picture. So this is a property I attended. I'm based in Victoria. This was signed off by a building surveyor. Directly under these 3 posts was a failure into the property, under 4 years old. The builder was very hard to make contact with, so I did a defect report. As I understand, the balcony has now been repaired, but we can see ponding water. So the clause out of the bottom of the picture clearly states that water shall not be retained on the finished surface with the exception of residual water remaining due to surface tension. This is not surface tension. This is an obstruction of the path of water into the drain. The other issue that we have is that balconies, the 1 in 100 fall, is not enough fall. The minimum should be, particularly for a lightweight balcony, 1 in 80. We need to get the water off those surfaces as fast as we can. So in our balconies webinar, we also break that down in a lot of depth. So well done, Darren. He got it as well. I'll see you tomorrow out on site, mate. I'm looking forward to the nice 3-hour drive out there to see you, mate. Thanks for jumping on. So installation, okay. By far the biggest contributing factor to why we see waterproofing failures. And it's not only from poor installation of the membrane, but it's the poor installation of substrates. Okay, so I want to make that clear. Okay, so I'll break down these key points and we'll quickly chat about this. Insufficient substrate preparation prior to waterproofing, insufficient training of installers before operating independently. Okay, and that is a key one there. So most people are taught out on the job site. Although we've had trade licensing in the northern states for the last couple of decades, it clearly hasn't worked because the failures that they have there in relation to the other states are, if not the same, perhaps even bigger. So, you know, we see the building commissioner in New South Wales. I'll follow him actively and communicate actively with him on LinkedIn, coming down with an iron fist, and I'm all for it because we need a shake up in the industry. The consumer confidence is lost. Insufficient continual professional development by career waterproofing contractors. That never happens. You never have to continually improve. It's not a requirement in our industry, but if we have a look at other industries, like the medical industry, for example, they have to clearly display, or even the architecture space, they have to clearly display that they're doing continual professional development in order to practice. Insufficient quality control measures. So we run through that one in depth on our testing and monitoring webinar that David and I run together. And compatibility between elements, common mistake in membrane installation. So I'll break down these pictures on this slide. So here we have the picture on the left would actually be a compliant install. But what I don't like seeing is a different film thickness specified for the wall and the floors. Most installers are never measuring their membrane anyway, so they're basically guessing. The picture top right, we see very common bubbling under the detail bandage that's been installed. If you can see detail bandage to this level, then it's a general sign that the membrane installation has been installed inadequately. These bubbles under the bandage will instantly be pierced by a tiler's notch trowel. And then we can see here the picture bottom right. This was a property that I attended, 18 months old, water failure from both bathrooms. We can see a leak control flange has been installed, but it's actually an incorrect grate to suit that actual leak control flange. It's meant to be sitting on these lugs here. So the tilers had to use tile adhesive and spacers to prop up the grate to match the height of the tiles. We can see the screed here. The membrane hasn't encapsulated the screed. Water's gone into the waste, under the membrane, and then outside of the shower enclosure. So it's gone underneath all of the layers. So very common to see that out on the job site. The picture here on the left-hand side, we can actually see WR board at the top of the picture. And then normal plaster has been used in the shower. Also inadequate fixings for under tiles should be minimum every 200 mil. Then David, let's talk about these two pictures, mate.
Gotcha. So that middle one there, at first glance, it looks, the substrate under that membrane looks very dusty, and it is. However, interesting enough, this isn't a discussion or a photo about poor substrate preparation. and cleaning by the contractor. When we dug a little bit deeper and found out what actually happened, the concreter who was responsible for getting falls to drains had used a leveling compound to build up some areas, and they'd actually overwatered that compound, not being too familiar with it.
Yeah.
And that resulted in it being a lot more unstable than it should be. So when that membrane was applied, it initially bonded, but then very sort of quickly the substrate disintegrated into dust and the membrane peeled off. So that was an interesting one. And then the second one, we have a flick mixer, which are used in most shower areas these days. What we're looking at there is that the membrane just hasn't been terminated and bonded correctly around that penetration. This is probably the most common issue we see in internal wet areas.
Yep.
Is where the tape isn't applied correctly, or the waterproofing is terminated out onto a protective cover that's used over these to protect them. And then that then later comes and gets ripped off when the proper plumbing fixture goes in. The plumber doesn't care about the waterproofing or doesn't know any better, and you've got a breach in your membrane around your penetrations.
Yeah, so, you know, a robust testing and monitoring process will help alleviate that issue there. All of these issues. And David, just to quickly answer your question, programs like the block do not help the industry, okay? We can go through that at the end. So technical data sheets, okay? I've got a colleague on here, Darren, who helps deliver this webinar with me. This slide's extracted from our technical data sheet webinar. We saw a transition from technical data sheets going from sales documents to now being used as evidence in court. Substrate acceptance, I'm just going to read out one blurb, is recommended before commencing the application that adhesion of the products to be used. Primers, membranes, coating, adhesives is tested over a typical area. So they're telling you to test the product on site prior to using it, which can be very hard to do. Commencement of the membrane system installation shall be taken as acceptance of the substrate suitability and preparation by the applicator. So if you accept the substrate, it's basically your fault when it fails. So if it goes to court, you've got to be very careful. We'll quickly discuss these two pictures in the middle, Dave.
So the one on the left there was actually not a product value. That was initially the assessment, but when we dug a little bit deeper, we sort of uncovered that the product was mixed incorrectly and also had some solvents applied to it. So that resulted in the actual primary waterproofing layer going cheesy and soft. And then when you had a rigid top coat applied to it, that top coat no longer had a stable membrane to bond to. And this sort of happened pretty well immediately after the area started getting trafficked. So that's what happened there. And then the middle one is actually a zoomed in picture of a liquid membrane. And what you're seeing is on the top half was a substrate which had not been primed greatly. It was a very porous concrete substrate that only got one coat of epoxy primer. And then the bottom half there was primed better, had at least two coats of epoxy primer and really sealed up the pores. And then when that membrane was applied over, it was shockingly easy to see the difference that that preparation had created in the membrane quality.
And then these two pictures on the right hand side, we can see water ingress or egress out of the bathroom or the wet area, and actually sitting, pooling around the timber door jamb. Okay, having two spaces packed up like that on top of each other was a clear sign that the water stop hadn't been installed correctly, non-compliant to the building code, builder at fault, 5 years old, both bathrooms rectified. Okay, and then this picture down the bottom, we commonly see the membrane not being protected. So we may have a nice, compliant, beautiful install. And I actually did this installation here. So I took this photo to show that the tiler had come on, tiled the walls first, rested all of his tools on the membrane and punctured the membrane, actually told me that they'd punctured the membrane. If that's not identified, instantaneously we've got a failure. In our wet areas, most of the failures are caused from the water traveling underneath the tiles, not over the tiles. So some of the failures have nothing to do with what we have done, but when it fails, it may look like it's our fault. And unfortunately, when we have a failure, we need to rip everything up and start again. So it's very hard to identify what has happened. To be honest, I've never heard of a manufacturer being responsible for a failure. There is 1,000,001 ways for them to walk out of it. And even the very best of them, most people come emotionally involved with the products they used. But when it goes to court, and a lot of it is going to court, and, I've written some reports, very neutral, and the manufacturers have got away with it. That's not to say that they're not doing their due diligence, but you've got to be very careful. David, in your experience, manufacturers, how often are they held responsible?
Very, very rarely. To be honest, the only times I have actually seen manufacturers come to the party to rectify an issue is when they're making a commercial decision to maintain a relationship with a big purchaser or something like that. That's my honest experience. And for all the other times, they sort of just walk away because they have many reasons to.
It's waterproofing. When I first started waterproofing, it was open a bucket of blue shit, paint it on the wall and walk away. Yeah. And so it was people were like, and I used to laugh myself and say, bang, I was getting $50 a meter for tiling. Now I'm getting $50 a meter for waterproofing, which was a hell of a lot easier to do in terms of workmanship out on the job site. After working in the teaching space now for several years, studying the codes and standards, it is clear how easy it is to get wrong, and most of us aren't aware of the mistakes that we're making. So, but the physical results from around Australia are telling us that we are getting it wrong more times than we're getting it right. And there is so many elements that are required to make a waterproofing installation successful. The waterproofing Venn diagram, Dave?
Yeah, so this, just off the back of what you were saying just there, I'll use a short example. Probably about 18 months to 2 years ago now, when things were starting to come, defects were a bit more prominent and there was concerns, and clients were wanting to safeguard it. I saw so many builders and specifiers having a knee-jerk reaction to what's the best membrane, what's the most expensive membrane that offers the best warranty. Like that was some sort of quick silver bullet answer to preventing waterproofing defects. And all that ended up happening as a result of people going that way was that manufacturers or the distributors would push up the warranties without actually offering anything different around product performance. And then budgets would get squeezed and the installation would get even worse because they couldn't pay for it. So the point of that being, there is no one of these elements, which is, the overriding, let's just do this right. They all work together. It's the correct product for the right situation, applied to the right design, the right extent, upturns, detailing, that sort of thing, and then executed in the right way, which means using a contractor that has experience with the product, is licensed and has a reputation in the industry, and then also applies a good standard of quality control, because really quality control isn't something that happens after the installation. It's part of the installation process. And if it doesn't happen, I've seen the best waterproofing contractors ever still miss something from time to time. So it's all of those things together that gives us the sweet spot right in the middle there. That's where you want to be in regards to that Venn diagram and also your waterproofing quality.
And the reality is, if you look at the NCC, the definition of it is to risk minimize. We work in a risky industry. Sometimes we can do everything correct and still have a failure. So we've got to realize that. But what we're seeing, and we've both made the same mistakes as what many are making out in the industry, that most people aren't aware of the mistakes that they're making. And it's alarming, because you don't want to be a statistic that ends up going to VCAT or to court. And, for a lot of people, it can end your business. So waterproof awareness webinars, okay? Our series is coming up, commencing on the 13th of July. The early bird offer is now live. I can't recommend enough the importance of attending this series. You know, today's been a little bit of a taster of some of the content that you can expect. The webinars, so water stop, correct installation of water stop for compliance to AS 3740. I get calls every week about bathrooms that have failed, and a lot of it is from incorrect water stop installation. Some of the key topics from that. Water stops, why they commonly fail, where compliant installation as to AS 3740 2010, which will soon be 2020. For example, does anyone know the difference between what a type 1 and type 2 unenclosed shower is? We break that down in the webinar. Who should install the water stop, the waterproofer or the tiler or the builder? We also break that down where they should be installed and who should do that. Understanding technical data sheets for waterproofing. I've got the fellow presenter on here, Darren Fitzgerald. We break down the critical and often missing information on technical data sheets. So if it goes to court, you need to know what you need to know so that you can protect yourself. What solids content is and how it will impact your liquid membrane installations. And we actually break down how to actually price correctly to ensure you make money and you're not working for, you know, 100, 150 bucks a day. I still hear people out there charging $20 a meter for waterproofing. It is impossible to install membrane at $20 a meter and do it to the requirements of the manufacturer's specs. So the monitoring and testing the waterproofing process webinar, I actually deliver this one with David together. We'll learn how to develop a scope of works for waterproofing. We'll break down the testing requirements for AS 3740 and 4654, so the internal and external Australian standards for waterproofing, and develop a holistic viewpoint of waterproofing, quality control and record keeping. We break down what David actually does with his business and the different testing methods that are out there and are going to become mandatory within the industry moving forward. David, have you got anything else to add on that?
Yeah, just that a lot of the principles and methods that we apply at Waterproofing Integrity really are the next generation of inspection and testing. We replace flood testing, water testing with electronic leak detection. We're really trying to be on the cutting edge of any sort of test methods and quality control to deliver the best results for our clients. So I think anyone that's attending this webinar would find the type of things that we do on a day-to-day basis very interesting. And that's what we'll sort of talk through in that webinar. So
then we have screeds, additives and admixtures. We run through what the difference between a proprietary and non-proprietary screed is, the requirements to the codes and standards, how to determine when reinforcement mesh is required, additives and admixtures and then various uses, an expansion joint detailing. Very common to see failures from lack of expansion joints in our areas that have screeds or under tiles. Balconies, by far our most popular webinar. So we talk about the common mistakes from design, membrane selection, termination and drainage selection, movement types. We break down the structural sheet flooring issue that we see millions of balconies have been constructed with and actually have no warranty. Okay, so no warranty for the structure itself and for the membrane. And then the last one in the series is basement tanking design. So we break down a site assessment, risk analysis, hydrostatic and non-hydrostatic installations, habitable versus non-habitable designs, wet and dry basement, and positive, negative and blindside installations. It's a very good series to give you a holistic viewpoint of what you need to consider. In the webinar series, how it differs from here is live Q&A with experts. So you can come online and answer questions, and we ask questions, we answer them directly. Over 10 hours of waterproofing content. So over 150 years combined experience from the presenters. We've got builders, waterproofers and tilers from right around Australia who are upskilling to ensure they're staying ahead of the tsunami that's coming. You earn continual professional development points from the series. You get webinar recordings after each webinar, and you get 100% money back guarantee if you're not happy after the first webinar, if you've purchased the entire series. And the other thing is it's tax deductible. So you can't actually miss. We are here solely to help you guys be aware of what is coming. I do consultancy work, but I love teaching, okay? And I can't say it any other way. I've created a lot of the content that I've created because I've made the same mistakes. Just today, I messaged the building commissioner in New South Wales, and the government is going to create a state-to-state harmonisation strategy, okay? So we're not going to have conflicting views about, oh, does this standard relate to New South Wales and not Victoria? Okay, so Victoria are now engaging the New South Wales government to help implement some of the systems and processes that are happening up there so we can provide some clarity and unity around Australia. It should be the same everywhere, okay? Maybe we might have some environmental differences, but our processes and systems should be unified around the country. National trade licensing is where we want to get to. I know most of us are doing the honourable thing on site and take great pride in our hard work on the tools. Don't get a surprise if something goes wrong and think, geez, I was about to do the series and I didn't do it. You know, what are you waiting for? It's $200, the early bird special. And I can't stress enough the value of content that you're going to get. Together, the only way we're going to stop the leaky building syndrome is to become unified and work together to help do it, because it's going to cost us a hell of a lot of money. Going to first say thank you for everyone attending. Okay, the support's fantastic, and it's clear that you're trying to upskill yourself and stay ahead of the curve. Nat, if you want to come online and read out some of the questions, David and I will address them. And if you also want to come on live, you can do so. So are you there, Nat?
Yes, I am. Okay, so the first question is from Puneet. If the gap between the plaster and floor is more than 50 millimetres, how do you fix it by waterproofing?
Technically, you can't. Okay, it is basically impossible to get a manufacturer to warrant their product on a 50 mil wall to floor junction. The installation guide from wall lining suppliers states in their installation guide 6 to 10 mil is the requirement. Once we get over 15 mil, it's very difficult to do that, particularly if we're using a sealant as well. Sealants aren't designed to accommodate that type of joint. And what we also have, when the sealant cures, it'll pull off the wall lining and create a little gap there already, which can allow water to migrate out of the wet area to an unprotected surface. David?
Yeah, I just completely agree with that. And I think the answer probably is that yes, you don't waterproof it. You go and have a talk to your builder and say, look, your sheeting contractor hasn't installed this to the right standard. We need them to rip off this section and reapply it. And that's actually easier than it sounds. And no one wants to do any extra work, but if they don't do it right the first time, then really they're liable to do it. So
I'm going to bring on my mate Darren, because he's been in the manufacturing space for the last 20 odd years. From a manufacturer's standpoint, mate, how would we go about fixing that issue? What should we do?
That you're talking about the gap?
Yeah.
The 50 mil gap?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a waterproofer, we wouldn't. It's up to the builder and the person who designed it, and the person who installed the sheeting,
Yep.
to provide the substrate that you want to waterproof correctly. It's as simple as that.
Yep. So Darren and I have, we work on the technical data, understanding technical data sheets webinar together. And he's come from a manufacturing background. Would you say the webinar series about pushing product or helping people become better at what they're doing?
Oh, definitely about helping people install and waterproofing systems a whole lot better, because, I mean, and what you've done here this evening, like I haven't seen what you've done here before,
Yeah.
So this is really quite good because it touches on a little bit on all of your other series and webinars. And I know how hard it is to cram in a lot of information in 1 hour. And so therefore those, is it 5 or 7 webinars you have?
6.
5.
Yes.
Yeah. So they definitely take up an hour each subject and each topic. So what you've done here is combine that all in a nutshell, quite short. And I like it. I like it.
Thanks, mate. Good on you.
You're welcome.
We'll catch up soon. Thanks, mate. Nat?
Okay, David would like to know, if a shower base is used, is it a requirement to waterproof the floor of the bathroom?
So I believe he's probably referring to a poly marble shower base. The first question we need to ask, is the shower enclosed or unenclosed? That is the first question we need to ask, and that's typically not on the plans. Okay, so under the standard, we have an extent for waterproofing. And so he's just typed in it's enclosed. So depending on the substrate then, we will always require at bare minimum a perimeter detail, okay, above finished floor height and a water stop at the door, and a detail outside of the enclosed shower base also. So David, have you got anything to add? You're on the standards committee in terms of this for the upgrade of the standards.
Yeah, so if we're talking about preformed shower trays, that is actually covered in the NCC Volume 1 if we're talking about Class 2 buildings. And that will actually, there's table F1.7 in there, which will actually tell you your extents of your waterproof membranes and also your water resistant membranes. And then on the note of the revision of AS 3740, the great thing about that revision is that it's now going to be about 3 times the size last time I checked. And that doesn't mean that it's 3 times more complex. It means that it provides 3 times more explanation on the same requirements. So it's going to go into more information on how exactly you are required to do shower trays, bathtub detailing, everything like that. There's going to be a lot more information on how you achieve compliance with deemed to satisfy provisions.
So one thing that we're going to have to tackle as an industry is many haven't read the current standard, and so we will have to introduce possible training, further training for the new upcoming standard. So thanks, mate. Nat?
Okay, Diane wants to know, what is the average expected life of waterproofing in a residential bathroom?
So the warranty that we must provide is 10 years, okay? And in terms of the expected life of the products, generally the 10 years, the service life of the product will generally be double that of what is listed from the manufacturer as a warranty. So if it's 10 years, the service life will be 20. The honourable thing to have would be for the life of the structure. And when we're dealing with below grade membrane installations, we definitely need it to be for the life of the structure, because a lot of it is inaccessible after construction. Most people now have, let's use the throwaway term of a throwaway bathroom. So they want to upgrade what their bathroom may look like after 10 or 15 years. So hopefully we don't have a failure. Most waterproofing failures we see in industry happen at the 4 to 7 year mark. Generally, if it gets past 7 years, you're probably going to see out the warranty period. Very common to see, and I can't stress how many times my phone rings for leak inspections. Failures from within the 2 year period. David, anything to add on that?
I would just to sort of reiterate what you're saying. I also work off the rule of thumb that the service life for a product is about double what the warranty period is. And on top of that, I think it depends which area you're talking about. Like 20 years these days normally is an acceptable service life for a bathroom because everyone wants to sort of, update it and remodel. But if you're talking about retaining wall tanking, then that's something that's going to be extremely hard to get to. And you're expecting your building to last for 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
You really should be planning for it to have service life throughout the entire building.
It's a part of the design of a below grade install is how you're going to repair it if there's a failure. Okay, so that needs to be a consideration for the design. Any more questions, Nat?
Yes, Megan would like to know, is there a website we can refer to that offers a list of compliant/reliable waterproof consultants in local areas?
So the Australian Institute of Waterproofing website does have a number of consultants on there around Australia. So if you have no luck there, then you could probably contact myself at Byron at waterproofawareness.com or David at Waterproofing Integrity. We'll be able to go to, or Darren's right, you can try the MBA. Is that in New South Wales, Darren? So you can get in contact with us. We'll be able to direct you in the right path. Natalie, is there any more questions?
Yes, one more from Diane. Do you have a preferred waterproofing system for transportables?
I don't tend to recommend one product over the next. Part of the training that we do here is to be totally non-biased to any specific product or brand. We want to primarily focus on delivering how we need to waterproof to the codes and standards based off real life scenarios tied in with the specific clauses of the codes and standards. And every situation really needs to be assessed on a case-by-case scenario. So the term fit for purpose has many confounding elements. And so we really need to address it all based off the design, where it's going to be used, what are the elements, who's installing it, what's the warranty of the life of the structure. There's a whole heap of different elements. So you can feel free to contact me at Byron at waterproofawareness.com, Deanne, if that would help. I can have a look at a design review for you, for example. Darren, I can see, has unmuted himself. Have you got something there, mate?
Sorry, I'd like to make two comments if I could. Yep. I'm really pleased to hear that wet film thickness testing via waterproofing applicators is coming online, is coming to be a part of their routine system. And I think that the series, the course that you do with understanding data sheets and high solids contents in liquids will help everybody in wet film thickness, because you need to know your high solids content to know what your wet film thickness should be to get your dry film thickness to be approved. So that's one thing. The second thing with internal wet areas, with from a manufacturer's point of view, 10-year warranty is a standard or most common in internal wet areas. And yes, David and Byron, you're right. Yes, those products will last 15, 20 years beyond that. But the key thing, the problem, and I'm talking about a manufacturer's, from a manufacturer's point of view, is that there's so many factors that come involved with internal wet areas that they are too scared to give more than 10-year warranty, because there's so many other trades that come into that area. And also that there's water in those areas every day of the week, morning, night, etc.
Yep.
Comparing to a balcony or any other waterproofing area, it's a now and again water event, etc. There's no chemicals where there is in internal wet areas, in cleaning chemicals, and the strength of those cleaning chemicals, and the membrane that you use. So without me saying too much more, that it's a scared scenario for a manufacturer to go, oh, don't want to put more than 10-year warranty on an internal wet area, because we just don't know what is going to happen from other trades, from other people, from cleaners, from etc. But the answer to the question is you guys are right. Yes, that product will, under normal circumstances, last you 15, 20 years.
So thanks, mates. If you wanted to purchase some of those wet film gauges. They are not only wet film gauges, they do cut the fillet cove in the corner to the same size as the standards and use the right angle checking gauge there as well. You can order them online. So go to sealcomb.com.au and they'll get delivered to your house. So you can buy them in bundles. It's a tool that my brother and I actually developed ourselves because when teaching at trade school, even with experienced or non-experienced installers, they had great difficulty cutting the cove sealant or cementitious fillet in the corner to the same size as what's listed in the standards. And no one's measuring wet film thicknesses. You can't actually get wet film combs. So get these tools, do your due diligence. Yes, they only give you an average of the area, but you're starting to tick things off and ensuring you're doing the best thing that you can currently in the industry. So we're developing really fast in the industry. And, you know, waterproofing is the newest, fastest growing trade, but it is the #1 building defect. So we need to stop the tsunami that's coming. I want to personally thank David for coming on and working with me at developing this webinar, mate.
No problem at all, Byron. Happy to be a part of it, and good to see such a great turnout here.
Yes, and to all the attendees, a lot of gratitude for coming on board. We are actually really having a crack at trying to help people get better at what they're doing. It's non-biased, no BS training. We want to help the industry improve. You know, I'm emotionally involved. I see what's happening from a homeowner's perspective. The great Australian dream's turned into their nightmare. And, you know, it's a terrible thing. The consumer confidence is lost in our industry. It's going to cost us a hell of a lot of money. If we didn't have COVID, all we'd be hearing is water ingress issues around Australia. So the leaky building syndrome in New Zealand costs their economy over $23 billion, and it's still going up. Our economy is 7 times bigger than New Zealand. So we're going to be up for, let's lowball it and say $100 billion over the next 20 years. Yeah, where's that going to come from? Okay. Waterproof awareness staff, legends. Thank you very much for all the effort, Nat. I really appreciate everything you've done. And Kai, who does the social media stuff. I'm going to wrap it up now. I've got some chicken schnitzels to go and get my mouth around. Apologies if you're a vegetarian. But I really appreciate everyone for coming on board. Feel free to reach out. You can follow us on Instagram or on Facebook. David and I will be doing a lot more together. So, yeah, I really appreciate you for coming on, and thank you very much, and hopefully see you on the webinar series. So have a good night, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.